Welcome to Meta5's webinar on how to make hybrid work successful. We have many people from all over the globe joining us today on our webcast, so we'd like to begin with a customary Australian acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past and present. This presentation will be recorded and you'll all receive a link to the recording once ready, so keep an eye on that in your emails. We would like to encourage all of you to ask questions today during the webinar by writing the questions in the chat function that looks like the speech bubble at the top of your screen, and we will have time to answer those towards the end of the webinar. We will kick things off with a short presentation on hybrid work by Meta5 Group's Director of Workplace Strategy and Change Management, Kristen Pistauer, followed by Annabel Khoo from Meta5 with a recent case study on Sanofi's transition to hybrid work before hearing from our special guest, Michelle Zimany, Sanofi's HR Director, whom we welcome and are delighted to hear her insights.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. So the next 15 minutes, I will share some of our insights we learned along the way of how to make hybrid working successful. Before we talk about hybrid working, I want to give a bit more context of where did we come from. So post-COVID, based on our research we do and the research we follow. So one thing we've seen, obviously, as you probably all observe, people want to work more from home. And in our surveys, we usually ask, given the choice, how many days per week would you work at home versus in the office? There seems to be a consensus. About half of the people say we would like to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week, whereas there's a quite large group as well of 27% that says I'd like to be in the office 4 to 5 days a week. And there's a small group that would like to be in the office only 1 to 2 days a week. So pre-COVID, on average, people were 4 to 4.5 days a week in the office, and this shifts now dramatically with people wanting to be there around 2 to 3 days. So that's something we learned. The other thing we learned is more insights around the key drivers why people want to go to the office. So in our workplace experience survey, we asked, if you can work from home, why would you go to the office? And the key driver really seems to be social interaction, in particularly the ability to do face-to-face collaboration, socializing, and the buzz in the office is also really missing. So as a summary, around the new reality of work, I think there's a few things that really shape up, a few trends that really shape up. One is obviously work from home will stay. Secondly, social interaction is the key driver to go to the office. And another thing we learned, actually, doing just remote work as well comes with a lot of challenges, and people really lack that social interaction in the offices. And remote only really reduces actually the productivity within a workspace. So this are some of the key drivers why hybrid working became such a appealing thing. It really feels like it brings the best of both worlds together. So we want to embark on a journey to discuss some of the success factors we learned on the way. For a definition purpose, so hybrid working always existed, also pre-COVID, but now it just got turbocharged because of the pandemic. And in the simplest term, it can be defined as an arrangement in which an individual, team, or organization works part of their time at a workplace and part of the time remotely. So let's dig a bit deeper here. Why is it so popular? What are the benefits? First of all, employees want it. This has various reasons, but one of the biggest drivers seems to be work-life balance, less commute time. There's a lot of aspects to that. Second benefit, the reason why employees want it is also beneficial for the business. And that I just want to name a few keywords here, like talent attraction or productivity increases. So if you try to hire a top tier talent nowadays and you tell them you can't work remotely or flexible, there's a high chance they would go somewhere else. And it has become really a competitiveness factor. And lastly, for businesses, appealing is also the potential cost savings around the reduced office footprint and increased flexibility, how you can organize work. It's not all it's not only benefits, there's a few challenges we are well aware of that come with hybrid working, just to name a few. One of them is if the more you work remotely, you tend to lose touch with your employees. There's a lack of collaboration and innovation that has to do with the fact that teams may work really well together, but they tend to be siloed, and cross-team collaboration tends to be more of an issue, and that impairs innovation. Inequality can be a big issue, and that refers to various aspects. In particular, not everybody has the same quality of home working, home office setup, etc. And another problem is sometimes in organization, different rules for different people can create a lot of problems as well. Hybrid can be really tough on managers. It's really much harder managing a team remotely than just everybody sits in the same room and you can just look over your shoulder and talk to everybody. And lastly, one thing we learned, like a poor implementation of hybrid can do more harm than actually good. So you have to be well aware of what you do. We are observing the industry, and through our work with our clients, there are 5 types of hybrid working we see emerging. There's not just like hybrid and it's the same for everybody. It's a very nuanced way of working that's different to each organization, but simplified, we see 5 key types. Number 1 is the office first hybrid model. This is basically people are mostly in the office 3 to 4 days predominantly, and have a smaller proportion of remote working component. If we see a 50-50 model, that's obviously half a week working remotely, the other half working in the office. Remote first is another one. This is where we see organizations working mostly remotely and only coming on selected days to the office. Larger organizations and multinationals and matrix organizations often adopt a role and team-based approach. This has to do with the nature of how organizations work. So some teams, like a sales team, might be more like a remote first approach, very mobile, whereas other teams, a finance team, may have a different agreement and they work more office-based. So the larger the organization, obviously, the more complex it gets, and we see a more diversified model. And lastly, we see the fully flexible hybrid model. This is basically a model where the individual independently takes a decision how much or how little they work remotely or not. It's highly flexible, comes with other problems. All of these have pros and cons, obviously, and each organization needs to define their own way of hybrid working. So just a few thoughts here. Each hybrid working framework should include 4 components you have to think about carefully, and that includes obviously the place where to work. It includes the time aspect of working, like when to work, is it rosters, compressed hours, is it team days, etc. It should consider the role, what type of work is done. Not every work is suitable to be done remotely. And lastly, what's the team aspect around that? What's the team workload? What's the type of work a team does, and can a team work remotely, and how does it connect to other teams? And based on our research from a workplace experience survey, we identified 10 success factors we see that make hybrid, that have great impact on making hybrid successful. So I'll talk you through those now. So the first aspect is it needs to work for all stakeholders. So in particular, like it needs to work obviously for the business, it needs to work for the employees, it needs to work for people leaders. All 3 key stakeholders need to have the feeling they're benefiting. If there's one group that benefits, but the other group feel like, oh, that's not really for me, or it doesn't work, it won't work on the long run. That's why it's so important when establishing a hybrid working model is you have to engage with all stakeholders, and each stakeholder does, it's really important that each stakeholder understands the other stakeholders as well. I think this is really the critical aspect of any hybrid working model. Number 2, establishing clear boundaries and guidelines. We've read through hundreds and hundreds of comments, and we often hear, can you please just give a bit of framework and structure around how we should do this? Can you just tell me come in on a Wednesday and I'll come in on a Wednesday? So lack of guidance and clear of boundaries is a real pain point for many people. So establishing those is a critical component. How do you know you have good guidelines in place? So if you randomly ask an employee, can you describe flexibility at work? And if they can't give an answer, you probably don't have a good framework. If you ask somebody randomly to tell you exactly what it is, you probably got a good framework. So this is a good test for your organization to see where you stand. Number 3, leaders need to walk the talk. In any change project, leaders are absolutely critical. Without the leaders, it won't work. They are the pivotal point. They've got a tough role to fulfill, but if the leaders don't support it and the leaders don't walk the talk, it won't work after all. So winning the leaders over and making it work for them is really a key component, because otherwise employees will never buy into the whole concept and will never be a success. Number 4, because leaders are so critical, we need to train leaders to do a good job. And a few aspects around a good manager skill set in a hybrid workplace are aspects like you need to set the expectation early and often, you need to be organized and flexible, you need to be adaptive of the length of your meetings, you need to be able to track workers' progress, you need to emphasize communication, you need to listen, and you need to build connections and be available for your team. So all these things are much easier if you're in the office at the same time with other people. So managers really need to adapt and learn most and build a whole new skill set. And it's really important that you train your managers to do so. Number 5, office design and office technology to support hybrid working. There are a few key aspects we see now shaping up as different design components in workspaces. First of all, we see large socializing spaces and collaboration spaces. So if the main reason to go to the office is to collaborate with others, we need to provide those spaces. That includes open collaboration spaces, but also Zoom rooms, for example, that allow in-person and virtual collaboration at the same time. And the other thing we see is a lot of team bookable spaces. So teams can come together and book a space and collaborate for a day, for example, in the office. And to facilitate the whole process, we see a strong uptake of smart desk and room booking system and utilization tracking. So the workspace in the future, it's not dramatically different. It's more like a fine-tuning of an activity-based working environment. Number 6, you need to give your employees the support they actually need. And obviously this depends on whether you have a office first or remote first model. If people work less at home, you probably need to support them as much. However, the more they work remotely, the more important it becomes to support them. And that includes obviously financial support, home office allowance, providing the right equipment, providing the right technology, training, and really important aspect is also manager access. Number 7, a great office experience. So if people can work from home, why should I come to the office? So the trends we see here really is the office, or as an office provider, you move from being a facility provider to actually being a service provider. So a great hospitality experience, community managers, good help desk services are really key components to make it a really nice experience when I go to the office. And this is where I recommend every corporate to learn from other industries, in particular co-working, event management, and hospitality. It's a good reason, like often workplace managers now come from the hospitality industry rather than the facilities industry. Number 8, a clear plan how to support and maintain and grow your culture. The more remote you are, the harder it is actually to curate your community and to look after it. So aspects like planned curated company and team events become increasingly important. We see organizations implementing community manager roles. And another important aspect is also you need to ensure the inclusion of more remote colleagues so they're not falling through the cracks and they're forgotten. Almost there, number 9. This is a key one, actually. Only implement a hybrid model that the business can actually support. Not every business is set up to go to a 50-50 or remote only or to a really complex hybrid model. If you don't have the leadership support, if you don't have the spaces, the technology, all these aspects are named before, it is important to basically go with a rather light touch model rather than a really complex implementation. Because the more complex the implementation is, the harder it is to basically to do it really well. So the recommendation here is go rather light early. If you feel very confident of what you can achieve, you need the resources to do it. It becomes a more complex task to do that. And last recommendation and last success factor is actually test, learn, and optimize. So it's really important to ongoingly evaluate how your hybrid model works and operates. You can do that through pulse surveys and focus groups and all sorts of success metrics. And if something doesn't work, it's really important to change it. So nothing is set in stone. You may ask, how do I best implement a hybrid working model? We recommend a 5-step process. It's really simplified, but number 1, we really recommend do your homework, understand the organization, get your metrics, understand what your people say, understand what your stakeholders want. Number 2, engage with the stakeholders, talk with them, understand what are the priorities, what does the company want to achieve, what are the employees, what do the employees want to do, and how do people leaders think about it. And then it's up to the leaders to develop a clear vision, how to take it forward. Number 3, you need to develop a change framework and an action plan to implement it. Number 4, you need to go into an implementation and training stage. And number 5, you need to ongoingly evaluate a hybrid model. So it was a bit rushed, but I hope there's some good insights for you in here. And now I will hand over to Annabel and Michelle, and they will give more practical, real-life insights about hybrid working and how it works.
Thanks, Chris. So on the next page, we have an image of Sanofi's Australia and New Zealand's new office. So Sanofi Australia and New Zealand is part of a global healthcare organisation that employs over 100,000 people across 170 countries. Sanofi's purpose is to bring hope, relief and cures to patients around the world by researching, developing and manufacturing medicines and vaccines, and by accelerating access to scientific innovation. So it's timely that Sanofi was starting their journey to transform Australia and New Zealand's head office as the pandemic sent Sydney into lockdown last year. Sanofi partnered with Meta5 at this point to lead and implement the change management of their workplace transformation from a traditional way of working to a hybrid model of working. Due to the lockdowns and all the other things happening at the same time, this ended up being a mostly remote change process right up until the end when people were able to start moving in a COVID-safe way. And also during that period, they were also making a big change from 4 floors to 2 floors, as well as changing how they work. So it was quite a big change process, but it was a really good process and really thorough process that we were able to work through closely with Sanofi. Our 3-stage approach involved developing the change process, which is really around building the case for change. So why are we changing? What are the key challenges and opportunities? And then developing the change strategy and framework together with Sanofi around how this was implemented through the rest of the project. Stage 2 was the key implementation phase. And how we did this was working through the change framework to ensure all staff were felt heard. They understood the project vision and the need for change, and how the new workplace and new ways of working could support this change. And finally, stage 3 was around helping to ensure the change could be sustained once people moved into the office. So it went from being Sanofi's new way of working to just being Sanofi's way of working. So from a planning perspective, we're just sharing the ground floor of Sanofi's new plan in this space. And obviously the timing of the pandemic and lockdowns also created an opportunity for Sanofi to incorporate those elements of hybrid working into their design at an early stage, including things like a larger front of house area, larger social spaces. And I guess, Michelle, you went through all of this. You could see how it went from your old workspace to your new workspace. What are the spaces you found are working really well? How do you find the change from the traditional, I guess, workspace through to this hybrid new workspace for your people?
Yeah, thanks, Annabel. And it is a significant change. It's amazing how much, we didn't move to a different site. We refurbed, our existing, and it's just incredible how much, how different it looks compared to what it was. So thank you for that. And I think the biggest shift for us was definitely this front of house, and probably the most difficult one to get our leaders and Sanofi in its way of working. We had big security, swipe everywhere. Everything was very secure. You had to swipe in to get into the lift. You're swiping in. I think there was about 6 touch points before you even got into the office, and now there is none. So to actually get into the front of store face, you're going from 6 touch points to none, and that was a massive shift for our leaders to start thinking about how do we bring not just our employees in, but our broader community to share this space with our customers and our patients, and really, look, from at an innovation, look at this innovatively. And I think that was probably the biggest transition. And a picture tells 1,000 words. That last picture that you had up on the front was really welcomed by by all of our employees and leaders, and we manage some of the challenges by all of our entry points into our workspaces are through access, but this front of house is really like a almost like a really lovely sort of industrialized sort of meeting space, cafe almost, and it really does encourage a range of collaboration.
Yeah, I noticed, like, so as we move through, part of the change process also training people on the technology aspect, because you've got a big part of that in the workplace, and especially in your front of house, it's the opportunity to hold events, to also hold training, and then there's also the spaces that people can break out as alternative work settings. So it's really a really good multi-purpose space.
Yeah, very flexible.
So just moving on to the next slide. Thanks, Chris. So after all of this change, we did a post-occupant survey with Sanofi's people a few months after moving in, and they gave the workplace an overall satisfaction score of 8.19 out of 10, which is considered a world-class work environment with our benchmarking with all the surveys that we've done. So I think what this really reflects is Sanofi's efforts in making the change to a hybrid work environment, starting with a really early change process, so bringing us on early and getting people involved and engaged from an early stage. Also, there was a really engaged change champions team throughout the project as well. And also, as Chris spoke about, the leadership being really visible through the whole process. So really walking the talk, facing a lot of the main meetings as well to make sure people understood the importance of the change and what this meant for Sanofi.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Michelle. So I guess with that, we might just stop sharing screen now and might just have a bit more of a conversation. And Michelle, I remember early in the project, Sanofi really wanted to be an industry benchmark in hybrid work practices. Maybe we could start, or if you could start by explaining Sanofi's hybrid work model.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think, we had embraced, and when I say we, broadly across the business, we had embraced flexibility. I think, we were, Christian, to your point, probably in that, in the office 3 to 4 days, and, some teams, 2 days from home or 1 to 2 days from home. But there were, definitely some resistors. So before, COVID, no, we can't possibly, work from home, or be as productive, et cetera, et cetera. And really, COVID gave us that platform to say, well, we can, because we have. And we really wanted to be much more employee centric. We realized that we're going from, from 4 down to 2 floors. Our our time and motion study really showed us that, people aren't at their desk, for large portions, day in, day out. They're in meetings, they're out visiting customers and clients and, et cetera, et cetera. So we knew we could do it. And it was really that mindset around, being a lot more output focused, which, our leaders, have been doing. When you've got a field force, you're not having visibility of your teams all the time, and output focused rather than input, and bringing, them along the journey, every step of the way. Now, I have to admit, COVID did help facilitate, some of those more challenging, maybe teams, and areas of the where felt, they needed to be in the office more.
And I remember that there's sort of a 50-50 in the office guideline around that hybrid way of working. How much of that was driven globally? How much of it was driven locally for you?
So we completely, we implemented our local strategy, and it was actually completely aligned to global. Generally, I'd say a lot of Australian businesses, particularly global businesses based in Australia, I think have quite a lot of flexibility when you're trying to work through on a number of time zones. Unfortunately, we don't sit in a great one for linking in with Europe and the US. So, we already had, stretched our hours and tried to get people to work flexibly. So we were definitely down the path of, we were saying, look, roughly, if you can be in the office 2 days, and roughly that 50%. Global were a little bit more specific around, Christian, to your point around guidelines being, 50% each week. We're sort of saying roughly, 50% over the course of a month. So some weeks could be 2 days, another week it could be 3, and you really flex depending on what type of work you have on. And I think that's the key. We've made it very employee centric to say, there's no point coming into the office if you're just going to be on Zoom calls all day. So, if you're coming in to collaborate, or you need to collaborate, then that's what you need to come in for. If you're coming in because you want to see people that you're not normally on Zoom calls with, then, that's why you come into the office. And I think people adjusting their weeks, to really go, well, these days are full of Zoom, so I'll stay at home, but I'm going to free this time up to do more of that collaboration.
I think one of the things that really stood out to me, which I was really impressed with in terms of the developing of that flexibility, was in one of the early emails I saw from Sanofi. I think in the little tagline, it said something along the lines of, like, I may be emailing you out of hours, but don't feel like you have to respond to me at that time. And I think that was a really good, it's a small thing, but it's such a big thing, especially with people feeling a lot of burnout at the moment. Just stopping them from feeling like they have to respond out of hours as well, I think, is a really big thing. And I know Sanofi has quite a big wellbeing program as well in place.
Very, very big on wellbeing and mental health, and it is an interesting dilemma around giving people, huge flexibility around, when they switch on and when they work, and if they're dialing in at night, then taking, the morning off, and working their day around their family and commitments. And I think I have that tagline because, I am on global calls in the evening, and I am sneakily at times doing, a few emails in between some of those. And I don't expect my team to respond, but it actually works for me, to get some of that done. And then, I might not, log on until a little bit later the next morning. And it's not for people to feel that they have to do the same thing. It's really about, working the hours that really do work for them. And I have no expectation for a response quickly, but, that I suppose that view of you shouldn't send emails at night, is probably, I think, a little bit archaic, because, we're giving people huge flexibility to work whenever they want, so, they should be able to respond and send when they want.
And has there been anything that has surprised you then coming out of this hybrid way of working?
Yeah, a couple of things leading in that were sticking points, for some of our leaders was, and it was not for me, and ironically in HR, but this issue of confidentiality. If we're going to be open plan, I have a lot of my calls are confidential, and I'm not sure that I can do this in an open plan. I need to have ready access to something. And then when you get into into the office and having that that white noise behind you, people realize actually there's not a lot of conversations where you think, oh, I need to jump into a quiet space in order to have those. And you can again plan your day that if you are going to have a lot of confidential calls, then maybe you spend the morning doing those at home, and or have them in the afternoon. But that was a bit of a furphy. When we actually got into it, it wasn't as big an issue as people realized. And the other element is, and probably more about why people like coming into the office, is all of those connections that you don't have when you're on a Zoom. You're not looking at the person next to you on either side of you, making eye contact as you're going up and down the stairs, as you're grabbing a coffee. And I asked a couple in my team to and I did it myself, just to make a note in one day when you're in the office of how many connection points you make beyond the calls or the team or the meetings that you might have, or the collaboration, whether it be on the stairs, walking from the car park to your desk, all that. And it was in excess of 30, and that's 30 points that you just do not get when you're at home, unless you count the dog under your feet and the kids around the kitchen table having lunch. But and that they are valuable. I think the number of times in the office and I see somebody and I'm like, oh, actually you sent me an email and I haven't responded, you've reminded me to do that. So it's all those things that I think that you don't realize how much you how much you miss them until you don't have them anymore. So
And it's very much, I think, underestimated those touch points, because we say, a lot of organizations say we want people to come in to collaborate, but it's not, like you said, it's not just that collaboration, that ad hoc part where people are just making connections just by being visible to each other. They feel a lot more comfortable then to actually collaborate, because they can see people they've had a few little other touch points at the coffee machine where you can have a bit of chit chat and get a little bit more personal with one as well, just to make that collaboration side of things better, and it improves the innovation aspect as well, because people are getting to know each other across the different teams.
Yeah, definitely. That you cannot underestimate the just that small, that the visibility of just those small passing somebody in the corridor can have around connection, and and even connection through the levels. So you might not necessarily speak to members of the leadership team all the time, but if you see them and you're hi, getting coffee, or then I'm sure if you did an engagement survey, it'd be I have visibility to the leadership team. I'd question whether that's happy. You've got to be more deliberate on some of that when you're working from home.
It is those learning and development opportunities as well. So even just the overheard conversations that you just don't get to do when you're at home, that you miss as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
So you spoke about that leadership component as well. And what would you recommend for other leaders who are considering moving to a hybrid model?
You definitely have to lead by example. So, I think, and be prepared, to be called on, behavior that maybe isn't, in line with, hybrid. I suppose the etiquette that you've put around the office. So I think the change champions were excellent at that. So, early when we came back, people were, we were encouraging people to go down to the to the collaboration space downstairs and have some lunch and collaborate, trying to not have lunch at desks, and pulling people up on that. Hey, you shouldn't be doing that there. And I think that's a good reminder, because it's just habitual. You're just used to doing some things, and a reminder to break out of those. And I think leading by example. So, making sure that, you are trying to create a routine that works for you, and being in the office, that you're flexible, about how people do that. I think were key, and being visible on, we had, a great change management process, but we had, I think, good active engagement from leaders on about, getting on all hands meetings, that being visible and really supportive of the changes that we're making.
I know at the moment, obviously, the lockdown's thrown a spanner in the works. You're only able to get into your office for a couple of months before lockdown sort of locked everyone out of the office again. But in terms of moving forward, I think collaboration and getting people to engage again is such a big thing. What are you thinking in terms of an organisation to bring people back into the office?
Yeah, this is something that we're really starting to think about just before we went into lockdown, and we're looking at we sort of swung the pendulum all the other way when everyone's working from home, so everything needed to be virtual, to make sure that everyone had the opportunity to attend, whether it's training and development and obviously meetings, etc. But now what we're doing is, because of that collaboration aspect, is still offering virtual, but definitely also offering some opportunities to collaborate, purely face to face. So having learning sessions, over breakfast, and I'm not saying it has to be a 7 o'clock start. It still might be a 9 o'clock start, but just putting on something light so you get that collaboration and interaction and cross matrix, department sort of interaction. So putting just purely in office based events, to get people on, and that's really about social aspects, development, learning, seminars, encouraging, some of the community in, to use that ground floor space. And different sort of team events as well. So really, trying to elevate that social aspect, and those touch points that people can get across, because that's one of the feedback, some of the feedback that we've got around all the development that we've put on has been not team specific. It's been open to anybody, and the feedback we get is I'm on calls, day in, day out with the same people, generally, give or take, every week. And the development that I love is the fact that there's different faces on the screen. So, how do we get that in the office? So
Yeah.
that's probably a key focus, and just, creating a bit of a buzz around it.
Yeah, it's like creating that carved out time that people have the opportunity to socialize and feel like they can socialize, and it doesn't have to be work specific. Is really important moving forward, just to create those connections again. There was some interesting research on Microsoft recently around that Teams aspect that was saying every time you went into lockdowns, teams within themselves started to collaborate closer within the teams, but between or inter-team collaboration dropped off. So yeah, it's important to try bring.
And we've definitely seen that between the first lockdown and the second. I think whether it's a combination of just the pressure and the compounding impact of the length of the lockdown, I think people are going a little more into themselves and into their teams, and we need to get, I think people are looking forward to getting out of that. I mean, having homeschooling and all that kind of stuff doesn't necessarily help, but it's a bit of a juggle. But yeah, I think people are looking forward to having the choice. So we need to make sure that we're giving them a lot of incentive, and the right kinds of incentive to use the office the way it's intended.
And I guess just in general around hybrid working, what has the impact been on the business itself? Have you found any impact from moving to a hybrid way of working?
No, look, I think the biggest challenge is that we haven't had a really good long run of it being a choice. It's either we've been in lockdown for a large portion of it. I think the feedback that we're getting is people want the choice. So whether it be a choice to come into the office, or when we are to be in the office, the choice to work from home. I think they really want to be able to look at their week and plan, what is going to work best for them, given all their other, personal commitments. And I think the other element that's really shifted, and people are starting to think about is, the office isn't 9 to 5, or, how you come and when you come into the office. If you want to miss peak hour traffic or leave early to miss the end of the day, some people are coming in for 3 hours and going home. Coming in for the morning, going in the afternoon, or coming in all day. So it's really, you use it the way you see you see fit to get the most out of it. And I think that, people are, that's been a good message to communicate, because some people go, I'm not really looking forward to the commute in traffic, and I go, well don't commute in traffic, so where I'm actually looking forward to, because one thing I've missed is I actually have got a new appreciation for the commute, because I feel like it's a time for me to decompress, particularly coming home. None of my family likes it when I finish my day, and I don't have that, that transition, and I moved from being in the office to still being in office mode, but with everyone at home, and they're kind of going, hang on a second, can you take the dogs for a walk or drive around the block or something before you? So it was a time to decompress, to go, right, how did the day go? What was I doing? What's next? And sort of you sort of leave it potentially in the car, before you
Yeah.
walk through the door.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the big things that I think first hit people, especially in the first lockdown, is that sudden lack of routine, because there was no differentiation between the two, and everyone's just at home.
Yeah. Yeah. So, creating some of that differentiation is important, whether you're, at home for the day or whether you're, going into the office.
And finally, do you think hybrid working is the way of the future for you?
Definitely. Our employees are absolutely asking for it, and have asked for it. Talent that we're speaking to, it is probably top of the list. One of the first questions is, how flexible, is the organisation, is the team, how do they work? It is definitely here to stay. I think, we've created an office space, for it, with a roughly sort of 65% sort of capacity. So, we are, we're definitely in for the long haul, and I don't think people will struggle to hold on to talent if they're not, embracing it in a way that works for them.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. It's been really good talking to you. It's some really good insights
Pleasure.
as well. So I think what we'll do now is open up the floor to any questions. If anybody has any questions, just on the top, there's a little chat function. Feel free to drop any questions in.
Just until we see our first question, maybe Michelle, I'll get things going. How do you think your experience in Sydney and that process has fed back into either other offices around Australia or even the globe for Sanofi?
Well, I think the partnership, with Meta5, Annabel, has been, fantastic. I was just off a call last night or the night before with Korea, who are about to open, their new offices in, I think, just over a month. And they have just, latched on to a lot of our materials. So we've had a conversation around what's worked. It's definitely been recognised as, a best in class from a global perspective. And, there's a lot of, sites around the world that are, for various reasons, looking at remodeling, whether it be end of leases or the like. And we've been sharing a lot of the content. So, definitely, at the forefront from a hybrid perspective. But I would, I'd also say that I think Australia is probably fairly, would probably be at the top of the list of countries, maybe with some of the areas in the US as far as hybrid as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that we certainly have seen, a change from Australia going through this first, and then the US and certainly Europe, and then back to Australia again. And so, how have those conversations happened at a global level, and how you've been involved in those? Have they gone around in circles a little bit?
Yeah, it has. And 1 minute, everyone was envious of Australia. And the next minute we're envious of the rest of the world when we're in lockdowns. So yeah, they have, and I think, there's been a lot of sharing and learning, as we go. I'm having lots of conversations now with the US and Europe around returning to the workplace. What are they, how are they doing it? What's working, what's not working. So there is about, bringing people back in. But I also think a lot of it's quite wrapped up in from a cultural perspective too. So I think it does depend how far, how mature you are in this hybrid journey, does dictate a little bit around how you're bringing people back to the office.
Are there any other questions? Does anybody want to throw any questions in the chat function? We'd love to hear from you. Don't be scared. Michelle, I suppose while people are thinking about their questions, one other one from me is, obviously you went through this process and sort of came out of that early in the year, yet to go back into lockdown again. Do you think you're going to have to retrain some people as we come out of this lockdown and you go back to the office?
Yeah, look, I think yes. I think particularly around how do you make sure that you remain inclusive, when you've got, a portion of people in the office face to face and a portion of people, working from home. So, making sure that you've got those inclusive principles that we talked, first time around, at the top of, your consciousness as you start to build out, and as you start to build, the interactions. And we still say, we should be, every interaction should be built, so that it can be done hybrid, and completely virtual, because you never know what is around the corner at the moment. So people are used to that. We said that initially after we came out of the first lockdown, and people were like, oh, but we want to get people together, and next minute there's one state that's got its borders closed and people can't get to it. So being flexible is really important, and we just need to make sure that people feel that they've got an equal voice around the table when we are having those meetings that are face to face and virtual.
Looks like we've got a question coming in from Beth. So does anyone have a permanent desk situation, or how do you manage that? Also, are there any areas to store items like lockers, etc.?
Yes, so we do have, everyone does have a locker. So we do have a clean desk policy. So when you are moving from where you were at the end of the day, you should be packing, well, you pack everything up and you put it in your locker, or take it home, whichever works. And we don't have a dedicated desk. So we have, specific areas of focus. So we have, neighborhoods, 4 neighborhoods or 5 neighborhoods. Each neighborhood is configured, in a similar way. We've got very focused areas where, ideally you shouldn't be interrupting people or coming up to them. Phones should be off, or you shouldn't be having long conversations in those areas. We've got, areas that aren't quite, still focused, but not quite as focused, with, double screens, etc. So it's for more intricate work, I suppose you could say, or less collaboration. And then moving up, into the center of the office where it's a lot more collaborative. And none of those spaces, you can book. It's really is first in, first served. But we do encourage that if you aren't working on stuff that needs, 2 screens or that level of focus, then you should be moving. So that takes a little bit of reminding. People are creatures of habit. So it's up to leaders and teams to encourage people to go, well, you shouldn't be sitting at, you shouldn't be coming in and sitting at the same desk every day. And people were starting to get, better at that, before we went to the last lockdown. So I think, and that's because they were starting to be more conscious about how they structure their day. So you're actually starting to see people's calendars and schedules start to look a little bit different, because they were, planning and using the space differently. So that would be my comment there.
I think the opportunity around the space is that even within the neighbourhoods, you've got the different types of spaces, but Sanofi also encouraged people that, okay, in that particular neighbourhood, there were no spaces. You are still allowed to sit in any other neighbourhood. You're still allowed to sit in any other space. It's just like a starting point. So your locker's in the neighbourhood, but you don't have to sit in that neighbourhood. And I think that helps with that entertained collaboration as well, because you can sit with actually who you need to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So people would sort of find their landing in their neighbourhood, so to speak. But they would as the collaboration and people were coming back into the office more, there was a lot more movement around the various And also thinking, actually, you know, I need to have a few conversations with so-and-so today, so I might actually go and find them and sit near them.
We've got another question from Jonathan. How have you planned for third spaces? So those additional spaces within the typical building landlord that you generally see on ground floors or other parts of the building. Are they additional external space environments being included as a part of your portfolio?
So as far as beyond the office having, you know, other spaces, not at, well, we do have some shared spaces in other states. So the way we operate some of our state offices is in a shared office environment, which works really, really well. But we haven't had any third space, or not really thinking of any yet anyway, any third spaces within New South Wales. You know, I think some people have embraced that when, you know, maybe their home environment during lockdown hasn't been conducive and they've gone to look at, you know, how they might get something close to home, but we haven't looked at any sort of third spaces.
Great. I think that sort of wraps up today. Thank you to all our presenters and the insights they've obviously shared with us. On your screen now, if you go to the next slide there, Christian, we will share a QR code. So you can really reach out to us to determine if you're hybrid ready. That concludes our presentation for today. We all hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you for attending.